Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio's Books and Authors Show with Lisa and Nancy. Today we're really excited. We're going to welcome Dr. David Sklar. He is an award-winning author. He's an emergency physician, so he's been around the block and seen just about everything. He's also a professor and a medical researcher. And so his writing, he's done a lot of writing in the medical world, over 200 papers, medical papers. So when I even think about that, I do want wine because I don't know how anybody does that, but he does. But he's also an author of his memoir, La Clinica, and also the novel Atlas of Men. But he's joining us today. We're going to talk about all of it, right? But he's joining us with his brand new novel. We always get excited when a new novel is out. It is called Moonstone Hero, and it's set in one of the most beautiful places in the world, Mount Kilimanjaro. But what's really interesting about this novel is it's all about life and death decisions. How to become a hero. Do you want to be a hero? Or do you want to take that extra step? And if you're going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, every step counts. It really does. So it's out now through Volcano Cannon Press. And you can go to his website, davidpsklar.com. And that's David, and then the initial P, and then SKLAR. So davidpsklar.com. So welcome to the show, David. How are you?
I'm great. See you.
Good.
It's good to see you too. I know Nancy's been enjoying your book. So Nancy, the doctor can write.
Yes, the doctor can write, and it's more than like a medical biopsy report.
Yeah, exactly. And can you read his handwriting? That's the important thing.
No, it's typed, so you can read it. But having lived in Kenya and seen Kilimanjaro for years from different parts of Kenya, it's and when we lived in Kenya, the border between Tanzania and Kenya was closed, so you could never really go visit Kilimanjaro, which was really on my bucket list of things to do, which I could see it, but I couldn't get there. But it's one of the most, when it's sunny, it is one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see, because the snow and ice on the top is like little rainbows, and it's just a beautiful sight. And that's something that sticks with me. So when I see the word Kilimanjaro, I'm always going, oh man, I got to see it. I'm so lucky. But I wanted to climb it, but not all the way to the top.
Well, you get to climb it in Moonstone Hero, right? That's the book starts off with a group of people doing the trek.
Yeah, it's not an
easy and people come from all over the world to climb Kilimanjaro because it is the highest mountain in Africa. And a lot of them, it has some special symbolism if they're able to get to the top. Now, top of Mount Kilimanjaro is about 19,000 feet, so it's really quite high. They start at a much lower elevation, around 1,000 or 2,000 feet. So, you're really climbing an enormous amount of height to get to the top, as compared to, some mountains. The mountain may actually be very high, but you're not actually climbing that high to get to the top. In this case, you really are doing a lot of climbing. So you're going through many different climactic zones. You start off sort of in the jungle with a lot of, green and
monkeys
and things like that. And then you get into a higher elevation where it's more grassland and there's more open kinds of scenery. And then as you get closer and closer to the top, it becomes more like, a volcano that you would think of, where there's nothing growing and there's volcanic ash and snow and it's cold. And so you go through all of these various climates. And in the book, the people who are climbing are from all over the world, and they're doing it for different reasons. And so they come together to try and undertake this, this adventure, essentially. So as a book, what I tried to do was sort of tell the story of these people who don't really know each other when they begin. They come from all over the world. And as they're climbing this mountain, they get to meet each other and develop relationships. And then as they get closer and closer to the top, start really feeling the effects of the altitude, of the high, being up at 15,000, 14,000 feet. You just can't really breathe very well. And one of them, fortunately, develops a very, very severe reaction to the altitude, which is called pulmonary edema, where your lungs fill up with fluid. You start to cough up blood and you can't breathe. And unfortunately, people die from this. If they're not brought down to a lower altitude, they can actually die. And so sort of takes place around this theme of, what are we going to do? We, the group, have been climbing now that one of the people in our party is becoming ill and is becoming worse and worse right before our eyes. And our goal of reaching the peak is within reach. We're only just a few hours away from getting to the top, and most of them have really, that's been the goal that they've worked toward. So what do we do now as this person who we've kind of gotten to know a little bit over the last 3 days is getting sicker and sicker? What do we do now? Do we try to wait until the morning when it gets light and maybe we can see if he gets better? Do we try and carry him down in the middle of the night, knowing that it's going to be very dangerous? We won't really see where we're going. It'll be cold and snowy. Or do we just do something different? And so that becomes the crux of the book, in a sense, of what does this group of people do? And it was something that I started thinking about right before COVID hit. So I was, being an emergency physician, I had often wondered about how we put ourselves in positions where we sometimes put our lives at risk to help others. But as a doctor, that's sort of my job. I mean, I took that on as an emergency physician, but I wondered about people who don't really do that as their job. And yet you see this happening all the time, where people will, they'll save a child who's in the middle of the street, putting themselves at risk, or there'll be a terrorist who's got a knife or a gun, and they'll go out and attack the person and save everybody, and sometimes get killed or injured themselves. So I often wondered about, well, what would happen if people really were in that situation? How do people make that decision? Is it special that they're heroes, born heroes, or are they created, or what is it? So that was sort of what motivated me to start thinking about the book. And then COVID hit, and that reality happened, where all of a sudden we had to decide: are we going to walk in the hospital without any protective equipment and put our lives at risk for these people who we don't know, who have a disease that we don't understand, and actually die ourselves? So that was sort of the thinking as I was putting this story together.
It's amazing, because when you think about those, we've been in a lot of life or death situations ourselves, just in wildfires, hurricane, like in the hurricane, not when we were just the other day, but we've been in a lot of those. And then also living in Africa, you do end up in a lot of real life or death situations. And I think it just becomes a second nature. And maybe that's with doctors, with what you do. You don't even think anymore. It's like part of your instinct to just go and help and do, because it's, and coming to this country, in other than medical people and people who serve in military, people I remember we did this on a show about heroes, becoming a hero. And I remember telling the story. There was a girl in a van being abused by a man, and I could hear it. And I was walking with two guy friends, and I just went to go and do something, and they pull me back like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, why aren't you doing anything? And
Well, I think that's, yeah,
see,
that's such a great
that's
question.
that thing is like, why, and I don't know if it's a thing from
Cultural.
cultural thing or just the way I don't know, you kind of live in the survival mode, being in some of the areas and places and things. But so I didn't understand why they were worried because I'm female and they're guys, but they didn't do anything. And that is always just, and then I couldn't really hang out with them very well because I was like, you didn't do
Well,
anything.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think some of it is cultural, that there are some cultures where people do sort of depend on each other, and they expect that when there's a crisis that people will come together and help, and even if that means putting themselves at risk. And then there's other cultures where that doesn't happen so much. And then I do think there's probably an individual factor in there, that some of us are just more inclined to help others. And there's probably also something to say about who that person is. So if it's a child, I think we probably are more inclined to help a very vulnerable child than we might if it was like an adult who, we think, well, that person maybe can take care of themselves, or maybe I need to get involved because it might be too risky. But I do think, a lot of us imagine that heroes are different from the rest of us. But I don't really think that's true, because what I saw during COVID was the nurses and the doctors and the respiratory therapists, they were normal people who had a lot of the same faults that all of us have. And I don't think they hesitated to go in and put their lives at risk for strangers. And they kept doing it over and over again. Maybe that's why a lot of them burned out. But by and large, people just decided this was who they were and what they were going to do, and it was their role, and they did it. So in the book, there's actually a scene in which one of the people, Barry is his name, who is very, very sick, is at a point where I think it becomes clear to all of them that he may die, and he may before the morning when they could at least see where they were going. And so they almost have this kind of group meeting, and they have to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to make a group decision, or are we going to each decide for ourselves what to do? And eventually they come to the conclusion that
don't do a spoiler. I like Nancy's behaving, and you're not allowed to misbehave. You're a doctor.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm not going to tell you what happens, but I will tell you that the rest of the book is sort of about the consequences of those decisions that they make, and the consequences are things that we might not anticipate. There's actually a sort of a romantic part of the book that occurs in which some of the people who are involved in having that conversation later on sort of have a relationship that develops, and those decisions that are made affect that relationship.
One of the questions that pops into my mind is, you have a group of people, something happens, and their goal is to go to the top of this mountain, and something happens where one person is now in the way, so to speak.
Right.
Do they
why don't you just put it right there, Nancy?
Well, I think I just did. But well, do they all need to turn back to take one person down the mountain? Or could some of them still go on and reach the goal, and only the others take them down the mountain?
Oh, but now we're going to have democracy.
Well, no, but see,
the Lord of the
thing.
Flies going on right now.
That's the first thing as I'm reading it. I was like, oh, are they all going to turn back? Or, these three are going to go to the mountain?
You
or
behave
four.
too.
I'm trying.
But I think
I'm the spoiler police.
Yeah, no, you get
Yeah.
into the crux of exactly
Yeah.
that difficult decision, because
Mhm.
um, I think that a group that would come together probably would have that as one of the alternatives. And what is the risk of the people who do go compared to the ones who don't go?
Mhm.
Um, is that fair? And it's a good question. A lot of us, I think, when faced with difficult situations, might look around and say, "Gee, those 2 or 3 really strong guys, they ought to be the one to
Mhm.
volunteer to do this difficult thing." And those of us who are a little bit older or smaller or less capable of doing something physical, should take a step back and let these strong young guys or women, do the
Mhm.
thing. Well, is that always the right thing to do? I don't know.
Mhm.
Certainly in healthcare, and this was one of the things I faced with COVID. I'm a little bit older, and we know that the risk of dying from COVID was much greater for older people,
Mhm.
younger people. So you could say, well, I shouldn't put myself at risk if there were younger, healthier people who could go into the emergency department. But my own feeling was, well, that's not really fair either, because they still could die. And so what if they're younger? They have more life ahead of them. And I kind of felt like I should be part of the team, and that I demonstrate the same kind of willingness to put myself at risk as I'm asking them to do. And in this case, they were residents mostly. So these were who were trainees. They had finished medical school, but they hadn't finished their residency. And I kind of felt like I should be there with them. In fact, I wanted to be there with them. I felt like that was the right thing for me to do, even though I was older. And then a lot of people who volunteered actually to take my shifts, knowing that I was a little older. And I finally just said, no, I'm going to do it. And what I did.
COVID was interesting with that, and I feel like it's similar to some of the wildfires we went into. Who goes near the house to go get the stuff before it burns down, kind of thing. There
Yeah.
was that kind of thing, and then I wonder about, like, in the military, in battle, it's like that's part of that training, is like who goes on the
Yes.
front lines, who does this part, and then it has, and when these situations happen, it's not like you get to sit and deliberate for 10 years. You need to make a decision and move forward, and whatever the decision is, go for it. It's kind of that weird thing, but I think it's something we've seen with hurricanes. People go out, like in Houston, remember all these people going out with their private boats to go save people, get them off the
Yes.
roofs. We've seen these heroic, just of regular people doing what can I do? What do I have at my disposal that I can do now? They
To
often
help.
say, the poorest person is going to invite you in for dinner and
Well,
share what they have left
completely,
too.
yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And, a lot of people in our country kind of look at these situations where people stay in their apartments and they hear a woman screaming and they think, oh my God, what's wrong with us? But by and large, I think actually Americans are very heroic people. And by and large, when faced with these situations like the hurricanes or other situations, they get out there and they do help each other. And I think we're going to have to do more of that. I think, unfortunately, as we have more emergencies due to climate change, I think we are all going to be faced with, being able to make these decisions. And oftentimes we have to make them with less than adequate information. So
Right.
some information, but we don't always know exactly how much risk there is, or even what might happen when we do make the decision to help out. And that's, again, part of the danger we put ourselves in. But I've observed people really doing an amazing amount of dangerous stuff for other people that they don't know. Maybe partly, where I work in hospitals and I work with EMS people and others. But yeah, I just I'm often just so impressed. and they're not like necessarily different people from the normal people that are just on the street. In most cases, they're regular people. They have their flaws, and they might, drink too much or smoke too much or whatever, but they,
Just don't tell the doctor.
but in those circumstances, they can be quite courageous, quite heroic.
I think, go ahead, Nancy, sorry.
I was gonna say, I was in a car accident that, I was standing still at a stoplight and this guy turned left, but he didn't go into the right lane. He just plowed right into the front of the car. And I was hurt, but people ran. That one person I knew, was a musical student of mine, I knew him, but all the other people who ran to help were complete strangers. And it was amazing to me how many people ran to actually help. And when the ambulance came and they're putting me on the stretcher and all that, they put the guy who hit me in the same ambulance as I'm going into. And I remember people objecting to it, objecting to the two of us in the same ambulance. I really didn't care. Whatever, I remember floating to the top of the ambulance and going, oh, so that's the dude who hit me, and then coming back down. That's in my mind.
How did you feel? I mean, did you feel any antagonism to the person?
No, I think he passed out. In fact, it turned out later he had just started taking blood pressure medicine and he passed out. I saw him pass out. My mind was, oh, he's drunk and I can't go anywhere. I couldn't move.
And sometimes we assume that, which often is not the case.
Yeah.
But our like more isolated communities, like rural communities, there may only be one ambulance for the whole community. And so if they don't put both people in the one ambulance, then that could really cause a delay.
Oh my God, we've lived in places where good luck getting an ambulance. You need to be able to transport somebody.
I was just, it just was a weird thought that came, because I'm not all there, because I'm going up and coming back, like out there, But it's just a weird thing. I remember.
But you know what? Somebody actually
they're
called me
putting us
too.
in the same ambulance, and I don't even know why I thought that.
Yeah, but they
You know
also,
what I mean?
because
It's just
I
weird.
think it's, because men have, the split of bathrooms and all of that. And we had also come from a country where at that point, it had only changed that women could go into certain places, so, South Africa, there was apartheid, but there was also that for women, like men only bars and women aren't allowed this in this restaurant or that. So that happened no matter what color you were. So you kind of go through that, but that was interesting because people helped on the scene.
Yeah.
And then a lady called me to tell me your mom's in a car accident. I said, that's not a joke. And I hung up on her because I was in shock. I was like, what?
Wow.
And we'd really just gotten to this country. Like and it was like, what? And so somebody followed through for her without the scene. You know what I mean? And I think it's things like that are pretty amazing because they could go, oh, well, I did my thing where everybody saw me. This was somebody doing something without knowing her and following through. And the woman called me back again and said, no, you're in shock, this and this. And so I think that's pretty amazing.
That is. And yet I do think that in some ways it is part of our human nature to try to care about each other. Assuming we can just get over against some of our biases that that we have. This is one thing. So I was recently in Ireland, and that country has gone through some difficult times between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and they came together, and it was a wonderful country for me to visit. I love the people in both Northern Ireland and Ireland, but I think they came to this conclusion that they were all Irish and they really cared about each other. And they were able to kind of solve some of these very, very, difficult experiences that they had of years of fighting. I do think that it is part of our nature that we want to be in a place where we can count on each other. I hope
Yeah.
we can figure that out for our own country, because I do see us kind of dividing ourselves and in ways that it's just not good for us as a country. So I hope
we can't
find
afford to,
things-
because like you're saying
Well,
about climate change, we're
mm,
going to have a situation. I keep talking about this on shows about, we have refugees in situations that are political unrest, but with climate change, there's already a refugee situation and globally.
Yes,
And it's happening not even just with just climate change, but like a hurricane can decimate an island like it wasn't, like now it's getting worse and worse, and people
mhm.
are having to move. And so we as a society, and I don't think just this country, have to realize, we actually need to make some changes, and we should work together to do it, because eventually, if we don't, we're all going to be refugees, right? And if we're
right.
not helping each other, then it's going to be survival of the fittest, and I'm the only person, and then what's the point? If you know what I mean?
Exactly.
You're
Yeah,
gonna
no,
be
we're
the
all in it
last
together.
person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I
We
mean,
have to
it's
see
really
that.
lonely.
Yeah, we're in it together, and that we
Mhm.
need to care for each other, because that's the only way we're going to get through.
That's
Mhm.
actually our strength. And
Mhm.
that is using our hearts and our brains, as
Yes,
opposed to being animalistic, if I can put it that way. We need to rise above that animalistic instinct that we all still have, and we need it for survival, but we also need to survive in the right way.
right. Well, and I think that you're absolutely right that, oftentimes people will kind of just look at their own benefit, whether, it's having more,
Mhm.
like during the pandemic where people cleared out the shelves of certain food or,
Oh, yeah,
or whatever it
really.
was. Yeah. But
Yeah.
so I think in that case, it didn't show us off at our best. But
No.
on the other hand, I think these situations that we're talking about, people rise above that and realize
Mhm.
that they do need to get in there and help. And that's really one of the goals for me of writing this book, was to really have us think about those questions and to really look at each other and look at ourselves and say, I could be a hero, and I've just got to encourage the same kind of heroism in our culture and in the people around me, because that's that's what we need for the future. If we're going to make it through climate change, or if there's
Another pandemic, they say that this isn't going to be the end of it.
no, I think we're going to have other pandemics. Now, I will tell you, during my career, that was not the only bad new disease that I had to deal with. So I've experienced
Mhm.
epidemic of HIV, of AIDS.
Mhm.
I was a resident. HIV was just
That's big.
becoming available as a new disease, or was just becoming recognized as a new disease. And we were all terrified. Nobody knew what was causing it. And, a lot of the same kinds of biases and so on that have occurred with COVID, and now with pox, a lot of those same biases came out without people recognizing a new disease is a disease that can affect any of us, and we have to find out about it, educate ourselves, and do kinds of things to protect everybody. Anyway, so I had to live through that, and then there was another disease when I was in New Mexico called hantavirus. I didn't know what it was,
Oh,
but hantavirus
yeah.
cropped up in the corners area of New Mexico and Arizona,
Right.
in Colorado and Utah. And all of a sudden, all these people were being brought to the emergency department who were having trouble breathing and were dying pretty quickly. And I had no idea whether or not this was something that I could catch from these people. Was it contagious? What it was? As it turned out, it was from mice, and it wasn't easily, or I don't think it was transmittable to people from person to person, but we didn't know that. And so again, it was one of the
Freaky.
very scary moments, you know?
You know,
Well,
I think
and-
what's interesting about this and what you're doing in your book and just in conversation is when you talk about being heroes, it could be, hey, helping someone just on the street corner. It could be there's so many different things we can do.
Yes,
But what's different with the medical community and those who serve in the military? Look at the food service people, the people working
yes,
in grocery stores. I mean, we've got to look at that. Teachers going through so much, including being, the political drama of where to wear a mask or not wear a mask in a school. I mean, what we put our teachers through was ridiculous.
absolutely. No,
it
they
was
were,
horrible.
Crazy.
they were caught in the crossfire. And I think that's one of the really serious errors we made in our country, was making the whole thing political.
Right.
Everybody, regardless of their political views, came together around trying to keep the population safe. And in our country, it really became politicized. And
That's really bad.
we have had more than 1 million people die in the US. And if you look at all the other countries, none of them have had 1 million people die.
Yeah.
And so I think we, unfortunately, we reacted in a not good way. And
Yeah.
so now we've dealt with these consequences of people dying who didn't need to die.
Well,
Well,
so with the
you know,
hero
when the-
part is it's with everybody like in teachers, medical, military, all of these are your people who are like
serving.
it's a way of life, right? So
Yeah.
if it's not, and yet people are doing it as a part of way of life, maybe not realizing it, or it's just a different profession or just a different lifestyle. But what I'm taking away from your book and conversation is it should be part of our lifestyle. And that's the
Yes.
only way to actually get through it, because you can't just go, oh, we have a hurricane in the backyard. Now let's really quickly be a hero. That's not how it works. It has to be part of our lifestyle and in our core being, and kind of change things in our thinking.
And I think
become
it's
that.
what we should be teaching our children as parents and as teachers and so on, that this is what we in our culture do for each other. And we have places, I think, whether it be synagogues, churches, places where I think there's a lot of emphasis on helping each other. And there's it's something that we need to be building more into our culture, because it will become increasingly important as we have to grapple with problems that are bigger than just one person. A lot of times we think, oh, that poor person is sick and that's their problem. But I think we're going to be dealing with problems that are much bigger than just one person's illness. And we have to figure out how we can develop that culture of heroism among everybody.
As being in the media business, I really have to look at the media strongly about their share in what's happening. And I really feel, especially having lived in Africa and watching the political scenes over there, that this
And Mexico.
right,
Yeah.
and Mexico. We lived in Mexico, we lived in Kenya, we lived in South Africa, we lived in England. So we have a more worldly kind of view on the media and who they are and what they do. And I feel that this country right now needs to take a really strong look of the politicization of the media. We really, really need to stop the political control of the media before it goes too far. We need to stop the
entertainment part of it.
No, it's not
Well,
really.
You know what I mean?
It's
yeah,
not.
absolutely. No, I think that's why they kind of do what they do. And if you're in other countries, you just mentioned, the media doesn't function that way. Having just been in Ireland and listening to BBC and listening to the television there, it's not like what we do in our country. Where, they do bring in people who are on one side or the other of a question, but when they're doing the news, they try as much as possible to have an impartial,
Yeah. Mhm.
the facts. And I think back when I was growing up and we had Walter Cronkite, and
Yeah.
he would just tell it like he saw it, and it wasn't
Mhm.
one side or the other.
No opinion.
And then if he had commentators who might want to take one side or the other, that was their job, to do it, but also not to make fun of the people who they disagree with. I see that.
Yeah, the nastiness.
Where they're just making fun of people who they disagree with and exaggerating things and trying to make it much worse than it was, rather than trying to find the commonalities of what we all agree on, which they could also do, but maybe it wouldn't, when their ratings.
Well, it used to be like, oh, your kid could be the president of the country, right? And now it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like, oh, that's a really exceptional job. Male, female, I don't care who. And actually, it's not just our country. I mean, look at what's going on in England right now too, and another it just kind of feels like I don't
We're
know if
going
it's
off course.
westernization, civilization being over civilized, that we've lost the actual part of civilization, which was kindness and genteel and
Right, well, just
helping each other.
respecting and respecting
yeah.
people for their roles that they have, even if you may not agree with them, at least respecting the position, respecting the role. And like we've been losing that, which I think is not good for us for the future, because anybody can make mistakes. Sometimes make mistakes just because we don't have enough information, or we may understand things incorrectly. But let's not just say, oh, you made a mistake, so therefore we're gonna tear apart.
It's like Dan Rather. Dan Rather was a good news guy, and he did have a mistake happen. Didn't mean it to, and he wasn't he wasn't out there trying to do propaganda or anything. And you look at him, I mean, to this day, I follow him on Twitter, and I don't know if I'm going to be there very much longer. But as we record this, who knows what's going to happen there? But I watch what he's always going like. Can we have some common
Dialogue.
sense? And and I think we've lost it a little bit. But so I think we should send your book to like all political entities, all governments, all municipalities, because it's not just the big. We think about politics. We always think about the big national, and it really is local as well. And I think that's something too, the more we can connect in our immediate community, that it will be stronger and look at things from those common grounds, because we're sharing schools, we're sharing parks, we're sharing the same roads, so that's where we've got to kind of get back into
we really
that.
depend on the other people on the road not to, go across the line or whatever. So
yeah, Nancy doesn't want to go up in the ambulance again.
Yeah, well, a lot of, and in the book, one of the things in the book is there is, some mistakes that people make, and okay, I mean, look, we're all going to make mistakes. So one of the points is that we can be heroes without having to be perfect. That one of the heroes like Superman, Superman doesn't make mistakes. He's always, kind of does the right thing. But as humans, we are going to make mistakes. But that doesn't mean that we can't do really courageous, heroic things. And so I guess that's another take home is, let's not tear down the people who are doing courageous things just because they're not perfect,
Or if you don't understand.
Perfect.
And I think a lot is reactionary too.
And the
emotional
name calling,
reactions.
like the name calling in politics is fairly new.
Yeah.
And that, I think
it's all sides. It's not just one or the other.
I mean, it's pretty new.
And I think it's horrible. I mean,
it is. It's terrible.
I think, unfortunately, when Donald Trump made fun of Ted Cruz's wife, I thought that was way out of line. You just don't do those things, even if you disagree with them as people. It's just not right. And a lot of things like that happen, and it shouldn't happen.
And people making fun of President Biden stutter.
No,
exactly.
My grandmother taught me, when somebody is making fun or calling somebody else a name, you got to look at the name caller and realize how low, she used to call it being low on the totem pole. That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
But
But
that's
no,
what
but I think the idea is, yeah, you don't need to
yeah.
tear down someone and particularly make fun of a disability or any kind of
Mhm.
feature that the person has. If you want to disagree with their ideas, fine.
That's fine.
But that's very different from, trying to laugh at people and make fun of people. And
Mhm.
so I just see this on our media, since you brought up media, and
Mhm.
it's so unhealthy, and it doesn't exist like this in other parts of the world, and it doesn't need to exist in
No,
our country.
And it
no,
does
it
no
doesn't.
good. It does
Well,
no good at all.
I do want to
No.
give a shout out to a documentary, which I think you would really enjoy. We just did an interview with a high school principal in North Belfast, and the documentary maker,
Oh, that's a
Kevin
cool film.
McGilvery, I think is his name. I can't pronounce his last name. I can do yours, but I can't do
McGilvery.
Irish. That's McGilvery.
McGilvery.
Anyway, it's Young Plato is a documentary,
That's an
and
awesome
he
film.
runs the school, young kids, and it's not a high school either. Yeah, it's a middle school, and
Middle school.
they go in, and there's people who have lived through the bombings, and their family has. So you have this generational trauma that goes through, and they go in and they show the news clippings,
Mhm.
and the kids are encouraged to talk about it. Yes, my grandmother went through this. My mother, when she was a little girl, went through this. So they talk about this and get past that
Mhm.
fear and explain like how the buses used to be, blow up and they used to be a protection. Now they're walls. And they talk about the Catholic versus they have these discussions, but it's called Young Plato.
It's
He
really good.
was a ruffian, the principal, and then he really got into philosophy. And so he's teaching little kids philosophy. And so through that, he's also going into the community, to the parents, talking about philosophy, about no one is right and no one is wrong. It is about this discussion together. He teaches the
Mhm.
kids, if one wants to hit you, how to handle that and how
Yeah.
to not just retaliate, how to breathe, meditate, how to think about the consequences of anger. And they go to a
Mhm.
board, they have the philosophy board where they do mind mapping and discuss
Mhm.
that. And
It's
then
really
going to the
good.
parents, and he's teaching the parents and the kids to have how to have discussions. And so,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it's
Well,
absolutely amazing.
no,
So
it
that goes
sounds
with what you're
great.
doing. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
thought you'd appreciate that because it's
I do. And in fact, again, since I was in Ireland doing this Fulbright program, I feel like we can
mhm.
so much from the experience of Ireland and Northern Ireland. There's really so much that they can teach us about how to live together and how to solve problems together without having to do it violently.
Mhm. Exactly. And
What?
he's a
Mm.
hero. Who's a hero for you? In closing that, yeah, let's even pick it. I'm gonna pick that high school or the middle school teacher, Kevin, Mr. Kevin. That's what I'm
Yeah.
called.
McGilvery.
For me,
Calvary, you got it.
I have to say that the heroes for me are really the residents that I work with in
Mhm.
emergency medicine at Valleywise and at UNM, because they're young people and they're really our hope and our future. And I watch them every day just going in and doing these very courageous things. They're
Mhm.
my heroes, I guess.
Awesome.
Nancy, who's your hero, Nancy?
Oh gosh, I have so many of them.
See, that's great.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go way back and talk about critical thinking. I want to go back even to Socrates and Plato.
Mhm.
And maybe it's time to go back and revisit those their forethought. Like, I don't know
And
if
asking, they asked really good questions, which
they did. Like,
asking,
did they know we were going to end up this way?
yeah.
Because it feels like
They
they
don't always
did.
have answers, but they do know how to ask questions. And
Mhm.
things we do in medical education is sort of ask people the questions just so that they can think through a problem, just like what you're talking about.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I think that is such an important thing, because
Mm.
a lot of times people come up with answers without really taking time to really think it through. And if we do that, I think maybe we'll come up with better solutions. Certainly in the book in Moonstone Hero, the people did sit around together and try to come up with a solution for a very difficult problem. We could disagree with how they did it, and the consequences, again, were somewhat unpredictable, but I think at least they did try to sit down and solve it together.
I think that's the thing. I think maybe in a life that is so fast paced that we forget to have that breathing moment, those 3 seconds before you react. So we become very reactionary.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. And I think COVID really did teach us how fast we were going. When people started to calm down, they realized, why have I been doing this to myself for 20 something years, working myself to death, literally.
Yeah.
How much fun was it? Do I really need to make that much money to be happy? Do I need 10 cars? I'm exaggerating
Right.
there, but I'm not, for some not, but it's, I think it taught us that, and we're still navigating out. So I think your book is so timely in that fashion that we're in this period of change, and it's up to us to navigate it towards being a positive change. And you cannot do anything. No success lies in solidarity. It does
Yes.
not. I don't care if you're a chess player. Someone helped you learn chess and how to do those moves. And if you failed, that's how you learned, and you were only doing it by going against your opponent. So there's nothing works on its own. Nothing. Period.
Everything's connected.
Yeah. So I love this.
Absolutely.
I can't wait to read it. And again, I think we should send it to all politicians out there. No, I think everyone, no, I'm kidding. I just want to give them a hard time. But no, thank you. And I think, we need more positive, reads like this where people can, grasp into it. And thank you also for everything you're doing in the medical world and emergency rooms. Man, when we all get in there, we're all scared. That's
we're
worse than
so
when a
scared.
policeman pulls you over for speeding in a cornfield.
It is one of those needed resources, but it can be tough. And I have great things to say about the people who are able to do that day in and day out. It's a hard place to be, and I thank them all for being there.
Thank you, everyone. Again, the book is out now, so go get it. Go to David P. Sklar. So that's David and then the letter P, Sklar. So davidpsklar.com. Of course, the book is Moonstone Hero by David Sklar, and it's out now through Volcano Cannon Press. And so go get it, enjoy it, and keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. Thank you so much, David, for joining us.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for having me.